Greetings, beautiful people. We're finishing up our second week in social science perspective, so I decided to make this short video to go over the assignments that you'll be turning in at the end of the week and also to make sure we're all on the same page. Learning objectives. So what should you know by the time you finish going through all of that information that's available in Module 2? Well, there's a bulleted list, blah, 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 here on the slide, and I'm going to go over them very quickly. First, you should be able to tell the difference between objective and subjective observations. We're going to take a closer look at that on the next slide. Second, you should be able to identify the limitations of studying humans considering ethical implications in social science research. That's a mouthful. Basically, you should understand that social scientists have to adhere to certain ethical guidelines. So they have their own morals or code of ethics that they have to follow when they're conducting research studies. And that places parameters around what you can and cannot study or how you can go about asking and answering questions. Third, explain the value of social science research to greater society. So you're trying to find ways that this information is useful and is applicable outside of just the social sciences. And finally, utilize fundamental approaches to social scientific research in addressing questions related to human behaviors. Well, that's basically your Project 2-4 in a nutshell. Let's move on. So you might be thinking observation is just observation, but in the social sciences, it's not that simple. So in 2-1, you learn the difference between objective and subjective observations. So subjective observations are based on opinions, assumptions, and judgments. They tend to be different across different observers, and it may change over time. They often start with I think, I feel, or I like. Whereas objective observations are based on the 5 senses and they tend to be more factual. And they're the same across different observers and is consistent over time. It often starts with I saw, I heard, I counted, I tasted, or I smelled. In Module 1, you learned about science and how social scientists use systematic methods to ask and answer questions. I'm including a link to a crash course here that explores the different ways that sociologists ask and answer questions. Ethical guidelines. So this information is taken directly from an introductory psychology textbook. The textbook is Psychology and Exploration. It's the 3rd edition, and the authors are Sandra Ciccarelli and Nolan White. Number 1, rights and well-being of participants must be weighed against the study's value to science. So this is an ethical guideline that all social scientists should consider. 2, participants must be allowed to make an informed decision about participation. So informed consent means you tell the participants enough about the study so that they can decide whether or not they want to participate. 3, deception must be justified. There are cases when a researcher may need to deceive a participant, but if they decide to deceive a participant, it has to be a good reason for deceiving them. 4, participants may withdraw from the study at any time. This means that if a subject changes their mind midway through the project, the research project, the researcher can't hold that person against their will. 5, participants must be protected from risk or told explicitly of risk. Okay, so you're going to inform participants of any potential risk when you get them to sign the informed consent document. However, your goal is not to harm participants, so you should be protecting them. Minimize discomfort if possible. 6, investigators must debrief participants, telling the true nature of the study and expectations of results. So essentially, once the study is over, if you've deceived them, you need to tell them how you deceived them, why you deceived them, and give them some information. Debriefing is an important step, regardless of if deception was used or not, but especially in the cases of deception. 7, data must remain confidential. And 8, If for any reason a study results in undesirable consequences for the participant, the researcher is responsible for detecting and removing or correcting the consequences. The Tuskegee Experiment is an example of a longitudinal study that violated several ethical guidelines. So the participants were never really informed of exactly the nature of the experiment. So they didn't get informed consent. They told the participants a little bit about the study, but not enough for them to make a truly informed decision about whether or not they wanted to be involved. Participants were also, in addition to being deceived, they did not receive medical treatment, and the study went on for 40 years. So you can imagine that that's considered harm to subjects. There's so much more to this experiment, and I've included one link here that you can check out to find some basic information about the experiment. But this is just one example of why ethical guidelines are needed. Project 1 comparison. So you have several tools to help you to be successful. You have a template, a checklist, an exemplar, and then the guidelines and rubric. You use the template to actually complete the assignment, the checklist to make sure you're on track. The exemplar gives you an example of a perfect finished copy, and then the guidelines and rubric provide details of exactly how you'll be graded. So the critical elements are, we're looking at individuals, groups and group behavior, cultures and cultural identity, comparing and contrasting, posing questions, and then the articulation of response. So in the first section, you're analyzing all 4 ads and you're asking questions about how individuals are represented in the ads. Think like a psychologist. Ask questions that would lead to researching a specific topic that a psychologist might research. Next, how are groups represented in the ad? So think like a sociologist. Look at the interaction between 2 or more individuals. Okay. Third, how cultures represented in the ad. So look at the symbols and the items in the ad that represent a culture. For example, jeans might cue you into a Western, culture, or an American flag, for example. For the compare and contrast section, we're looking to see if you can identify similarities and differences among the ads, that a way to connect these ads, right? And you're not thinking about just selling a product. You're using these ads as a way to understand the individual, the group, and the culture. So you're, at this point, you're moving into higher order thinking. So you're going beyond just the basics. In the next section, the overarching questions, you're thinking like a social scientist. So these are questions that could basically be applicable or relevant for all of the different social sciences. And the best way to do this is to identify a theme or themes that you notice when you review all 4 ads. The last way you'll earn points is just by making sure your grammar and mechanics are on point. All right, you made it to the end of the slideshow. If you have a question, go ahead and post it to the questions thread. I check the questions thread once a day, every day. If you feel like the question is more personal, then go ahead and send me an email. And I do check my email once a day, every day. This assignment that you complete, Project 1, which is 2-4, it actually, you'll revisit this same project. You'll build on it in projects 2 and 3. So it's really a good idea to do, put some effort in this first draft.